Let's try to apply what we have learned about how to determine direction of vectors, and we apply it in a few examples that we are going to show right now. Okay, so for now I've put down the first vector that we have discussed in previous videos, and it's 5 meter and it's 45 degree above the positive x-axis. Again, remember our purpose for this video is to determine the direction of vectors. So again, if you remember from a previous video, 3 things you need to mention: the angle, above or below, positive or negative. Okay, so let's try to determine the vectors for a few other vectors. Determine the direction of vectors for a few other vectors. Okay, first one. So F here represent force. So let's try to determine the direction of vectors. So the magnitude is not our focus, so let me give you a magnitude. Let's say the magnitude is 100 Newton, and we are asked to determine the direction of vectors. So what should we do? First, we should determine the angle between this vector here and the nearest x-axis. Okay, there's only two sides of the x-axis. One side is the positive side of the x-axis, and the other one is the negative side of the x-axis. Well, if you try to draw it for the positive side of the x-axis, this will be the direction that you measure. If you draw it from the positive side of the x-axis, you need to measure this one. Okay, of course you can see that this vector f here, it's much nearer to the negative x-axis compared to the positive x-axis. So we are actually not measuring this. We are actually just measuring this one. Okay, so we measure it and it appears to be 60 degree. So we can write down our angle is 60 degree. Now that has fulfilled our first part. The second part, above or below. Look at the region. Our pink region here is definitely above the x-axis, right? So if it's above the x-axis, then above. Okay, now which side of the x-axis, whether it's the positive side of the x-axis or the negative side of the x-axis? Well, the positive side is towards this side. Okay, the positive side is towards this side. The negative side is towards that side. Okay, so it's quite obvious that now it's the negative x-axis. Okay, so it is 60 degree above the negative x-axis. So that's how we define. We see that vector, which region it is in, whether the region is above or below, whether the region is at the negative side of the x-axis or the positive side of the x-axis. Okay, so this is for force. Let's look at the next example. Next example, we have this brown vector here. It's actually representing momentum. This time it's momentum. So this P here, it's momentum, and this vector here, it's exactly lying on the x-axis and is pointing towards the left or pointing towards the negative x direction. So in this case, right, there's no need for us to determine any angle anymore because angle is just 0. And if it's 0, right, there's no purpose of writing it. So you can just write, it's towards the negative x direction. So we can see that it's definitely pointing towards the negative x direction, right? So writing towards the negative x direction is already clear enough to tell us that our momentum is pointing towards the left. Okay, last one. We have vector A here representing acceleration. So if it's representing acceleration, if you put it in this axis here, we'll see that, okay, let's put in the magnitude first. The magnitude is 1 meter per second, 1 meter per second square. And now to determine the angle, the angle should be towards the nearest x-axis. Towards the negative side is a bit too far, so we go towards the positive side. So we measure this to be, let's say 20 degrees Celsius, 20 degree. Then this will be 20 degree we put in. So let's look at the region. This is above or below? Below. This is for the positive side or the negative side? Positive side. So now we have 20 degree below the positive x-axis. So that's it. That's how we determine the direction of vectors. Again, one thing to take note is, if you notice all my vectors, I have carefully placed the tail of the vector on the origin. I'm not placing the head at the origin. I'm not doing something like this. I'm not pointing the head at the origin. No, I'm pointing the tail. I'm placing the tail at origin. Okay, S the tail is over here, F the tail is over here, P the tail is over here, A the tail is over here. I place the tail at the origin before I determine the angle. That's very important. Okay, so that's how you determine the direction of vectors and express it in words.